727 coming up towards 728 in Trinidad and Tobago. Well, we should have been having this discussion a long time ago as small island states, but climate change is now continuing to dangerously impact the lives of people around the world. And for those of us in this Caribbean region, we find ourselves on the front lines of that crisis that we did not cause, but we are suffering the impact of it. Because of that, the Climate Analytics Caribbean event on the 14th of December will take a deep dive into the outcomes of COP27, which was held in Sharm el-Sheikh in Egypt last month. Through a Caribbean lens, it will be looked at. And to give us some context to this dialogue, we're joined by Rueanna Haynes, Director of Climate Analytics Caribbean. Very good morning to you. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. It's nice to be here.
Right. So tell us, it's an event coming up on the 14th, which is tomorrow.
Yes.
Tell us about it, the basic information on the event itself.
Well, the event is going to be taking place at Millfleur around the Savannah at the National Trust. It will start at 6 p.m. What we intend to do is to take a look at, in some very, very deep detail, what the outcomes are from this last conference, COP27, that took place in Egypt this year. It was a landmark COP. There were a number of decisions taken that were really important for small island developing states, including the establishment of a fund for loss and damage financing. And we think it's really important for people to understand what is happening at these conferences and how it impacts their lives on the ground.
Okay, so the event tomorrow, let's get the basics of it. Is it an event that people can attend? Can they follow online?
Yes.
What time is the event? And that basic information, please.
Yes, certainly. So you can attend in person. You would need to RSVP. I think seats are filling up quite quickly for that. You can also follow online, but you have to register in order to be able to follow online.
Where do I go to register?
It starts at 6 p.m. sharp, so you can follow us at Climate Analytics Caribbean on Twitter or LinkedIn, and all of the registration information, including the links, would be included there.
Tell us a bit about the organization, Climate Analytics Caribbean, because by definition it sounds as if it's about making sense of all those numbers in relation to the climate and how it's relevant to us in our part of the world.
More than just the numbers, but yes, no problem. So Climate Analytics began as a Berlin-based climate policy think tank. They started work in 2008, and their focus was really the science policy interface. So Climate Analytics, in its origins, is an organization that helped to support small island developing states in the climate change negotiation process by providing them with the science rationale for the positions that small island developing states would then take within the global negotiation process. Since then, the organization has expanded quite a bit. We now have offices in New York, we have offices in Togo, in Perth, Australia, as well as in Nepal. We recently established Climate Analytics Caribbean in Trinidad and Tobago last year.
And as far as the information that is going to be disseminated tomorrow evening from 6 p.m. at Millfleur around the Savannah, one of the Magnificent Seven, as we know only too well, what do you hope that people will get from it? Because I understand the point that you're making about the landmark decisions that would have been made about compensation, but you know how these big nations operate. They say things, but they don't necessarily follow through. And we now have a situation where I'm reading a report here from the Caribbean Media Corporation, where there's a historical lawsuit filed regarding climate change obligations for developed countries. So again, it seems that you say one thing at COP, whether it's 26 or 27 or 28 or 29, but to actually do it is a different story.
I think that's the case with most international obligations where we're operating in a system as complex as the global climate system. So what we're dealing with here, it goes beyond just an environmental issue. It's an issue that actually gets to the heart of the global economy and the heart of the economies of all countries. And so this matter of having countries match deeds to actions is one that has been a struggle for the 30 years that we've been discussing this issue. We've had some successes, some notable failures. So for example, we established the Green Climate Fund in 2010, and a promise was made that that fund would receive $100 billion a year out to 2020, and that promise has yet to be met. it is supposedly going to be met this year. But yet we persist. So the global climate crisis is a problem where we are racing against time. It's very clear from the science that we have just this critical decade left to really make a difference as to what will happen in 2050.
Well, you know, if I could jump in here, Ms. Haynes, I mean, forgive my rudeness of jumping in. You know, if, God willing, we are alive, or what we are in 2022, in 2032, we'll be told that that decade, this decade, the 2030s, is the crisis time. We had a pivot point 20 years ago, we had a pivot point 10 years ago, we had a pivot point last year in Scotland, we have another pivot point. The pivot point just keep moving.
I don't know if it's fair to say that the pivot point keeps moving. I will say that we are continuing to run out of time, and I will say that the window for action continues to close and is rapidly closing.
Shouldn't we accept that and as much as the so-called first world will say it is not so, that they don't really care about us? The bottom line is that we are left to fend for ourselves, what is called the so-called global south, and as a result we need to find ways to either, whether you call it put pressure on them or to embarrass them or whatever, because they cause this and we are the ones to live with it, but they don't really care about us.
I'm not sure if that's necessarily completely true. I do think that that is part of the scenario.
Okay, you might have...
But let me continue.
No. You might have your odd example.
No, this is not about an odd example. This is about the fact that what we see happening now and what we know has been happening is not just the first world, but it's also multinational corporations. And these corporations, they come from the first world, but they also operate in our context. They're also enabled by governments across the global south. And they are increasingly going to also be responsible for this problem.
Okay.
And so it's not just, yes, there is that issue of the divide between the global north and the global south and the historical responsibility, but we are now past that point. We are cruising past that point. This problem is more complex than that.
Okay, Ms. Haynes, okay, I take that point. But as in, for example, COP26, India used their pressure to change the wording of the final statement, the COP26, about the use of coal, because they wanted to have the wording to abandon the use of coal, and they changed it so they could continue to use coal. Now, why isn't there some validity in a nation like India or China and so on saying, well, okay, you all had the opportunity to pollute the world for 150 years in pursuit of your development goals. Why are we now being denied that opportunity?
Because the world has changed. And as you said, the goalpost continues to move. If we are in a paradigm where we say, well, okay, the developed countries have had however many years since the Industrial Revolution to pollute, now it's our turn, then we get absolutely nowhere. And those of us on the front line in island states are made to suffer. And then it becomes not just the developed world that's killing us and doesn't care, but also our so-called developing country partners. And so the world has changed. We have technology now. That can afford states the opportunity to leapfrog that brown development. No, we are in 2022. Development no longer means a right to pollute. It no longer means that. And we do have countries that are taking the opportunity to leapfrog that brown development and go straight into a low carbon, sustainable model of development. And that is what, frankly, we all need to be doing.
Okay, and where does that place us, therefore, in Trinidad and Tobago, as per capita one of the leading polluters?
As per capita, one of the leading polluters, there are obviously consequences around there are moral issues, right? We are also a small island developing state. We are also on the front lines of the climate crisis. It means we have a responsibility to act.
And act how? Should we stop using natural gas? Should we close down our oil? Well, the Petrotrin is closed down already. Should we stop refining oil?
Petrotrin is closed down already. The reason why Petrotrin is closed down, global forces, internal management, I believe what we need to avoid is another situation where we are closing down oil refineries just like that, without a plan, without a long-term plan. as well as the loss and damage issues, the financing issues that are being discussed in the Global Forum, we are also discussing a just energy transition. And this is a discussion where all countries are participating. It's not just about the North coming to tell the South what to do. It is a discussion where all of us can participate and can benefit, can get the tools, can get the know-how, can even get the support, the financial support, to be able to transition our societies in a just and equitable manner.
And therefore, based on that, and maybe we could spend the rest of the time arguing that point about not being lectured to by those who did the polluting. But tomorrow, that event at 6 p.m., what is going to be discussed as to what COP27 really means, to break it down as to what that represents for us? What is actually going to be discussed tomorrow? Who are going to be some of the presenters and speakers?
Well, we will have a representative from the Ministry of Planning and Development that is going to speak to the impact of the COP, specifically on Trinidad and Tobago. And then myself and my team, we will all be presenting on the key outcomes from COP27. We'll be looking at what were some of the priorities of Caribbean countries, island countries in particular, heading into that COP. What happened? What were some of the outcomes? Were those priorities actually met? And critically, we're also going to be talking about, so what's next? What happens next year within this critical decade for action, because every COP is important in this decade. And
I think the next one is going to be in the UAE. Is that correct?
Yes, it is.
So, were you in attendance at Sharm el Sheikh?
Yes,
there?
I was.
Right. What sense did you get from it? Because again, just following a lot of the reporting of it, as you said, landmark announcements, finally getting the rich countries to admit to some sort of commitment, but still, at the end of it all, it seemed that the common perspective from those advocating for greater fairness was that it's just words.
Yeah. So we went into Sharm el Sheikh in a very, very challenging geopolitical situation. So we had the war, we have the war still going on in Russia. We're still all reeling from the impacts of COVID-19. We have, a fossil fuel energy crisis, food crisis. So we went into that. This is by far, I've been to about 12 COPs now. This is by far one of the most challenging I've ever attended because of the geopolitical situation, which really just was not favorable to having good outcomes from any kind of COP. Climate change discussions tend to be pushed to the side for more pressing, quote-unquote pressing global issues. And so the atmosphere in Sharm el Sheikh, even from the very beginning, was quite charged. The media was having a field day with, the internal national situation in Egypt, and you had, all of these pressures. There are about 70 plus world leaders that descended for the World Leaders Implementation Summit that took place at the beginning. And the first thing we did was to have a fight over the agenda. Because even with the outcome that we have now on loss and damage finance, it was not on the agenda heading into COP27. So the first thing we had to do was to make sure to get the issue on the agenda, and that was a very difficult discussion.
And in conclusion, I'm sure you're going to go into even more detail with the event that's happening tomorrow. Just remind us again, the spots are filling up. What do people have to do again to register?
So please follow us at Climate Analytics Caribbean on LinkedIn, on Twitter. All of the registration information is there, including the link to register and receive the Zoom link. You can follow along online, or you can RSVP to try to get in person.
And at the end of it all, because in just about 60 seconds, as you talk about that effort, that fight to get the fundamental items on the agenda, isn't it still about the so-called developed world, or the white world if you prefer, determining the agenda? Isn't that the bottom line at the end of it all?
Absolutely not. They do not determine the agenda. We operate in a multilateral process where each state, regardless of how small, we all have one seat and we all have one vote. We don't vote in the UNFCCC, but if we did, it would clearly be the Global South. 134 countries make up the bloc of G77 and China. We dictate what goes on to the agenda.
And if after I sign on to everything and I refuse to follow up on it, what happens next?
Peer pressure. I mean, that's the only way to make large influential countries pay attention, isn't it? It's the carrot and the stick.
Well, we'll see what happens with the discussion that's going to take place tomorrow. Thanks very much, Ms.
Thank
Haynes,
you
for
very
taking the
much.
time. It should make for an interesting dialogue happening tomorrow evening from 6 o'clock at Millfleur, and you have the contact information if you want to register to be part of that dialogue. 742 in Trinidad and Tobago. We have a traffic update for you. We're looking at the Caroni area with the camera switching around, showing us the area of that interchange in the general region of Grand Bazaar, and the traffic flowing along at this stage. Even as it switches around, have a look at the Caroni River. We'll be back right after this break.